Hi everyone, hope you're doing well today. We are continuing with our daily devotional videos and we're going through the New Testament letter of Galatians. My name is Matt Carvel, thanks for joining us today. We're at the end of chapter 2 and going into the beginning of chapter 3. And as you've already seen, I am sure, Galatians is something of a radical letter from the Apostle Paul with lots of challenging and big things to say, and this passage is no exception. And the radical nature of it is not so much maybe in the language used necessarily, but this the big concept that I think the Apostle Paul is trying to explain to the Galatians. And it's all to do with the nature of what the Christian life is. And in this point at the end of chapter 2, he reflects on his own life and really his own conversion. And he talks about the fact that he has died and is now living a new life. And it's important for us to remember that and realize that to become a Christian is to go from death to life. It's that radical. It's not a change of mind. It's not a sort of just turning over a new leaf. No, the gospel is not. The gospel is death and life. That's what we see in Jesus. And that's what we see in the life of every Christian as well. That's why we get baptized. It's a demonstration that conversion, coming to Jesus, is about death to an old way and new life in the Spirit that only Jesus can bring about through our faith in Him. And perhaps it's if your conversion to Christianity, perhaps if it didn't seem radical in terms of a specific moment or the way you lived before and the way you lived after, we can sometimes, if that's not the case, we can sort of lose the sense, the radical nature of what it means to become a Christian. But nonetheless, it is true. We all have been converted by Jesus, and that is a radical conversion, a death to life conversion. And what Paul is going on to say here, and really underlines, we can apply that principle really in the way we think about ourselves even now. He's saying, my old self has been put to death in coming to Jesus. And we must remember that that's something that's happened to us. The old priorities have gone. Living for myself is no longer what life is about anymore. Justifying myself, thinking about my life in terms of it's about me and what I can get out of life. That's not a Christian way of thinking. That's an old pre-Christian way of thinking. And we see demonstrated here that Paul turns that completely around, that he sees himself as an instrument in God's hand. His life is Christ-centered. It's about Christ. It's not about me. My life is not my own. That's a challenging thing to think about. It's something that's easy to agree with if you're grounded in Christian doctrine and the gospel. You can say, yeah, my life is not my own. Maybe it's something that we sing about or reflect on that in our worship. But is that played out in our lives? Would someone look at the way that you live your life and what you prioritize and say, wow, actually you're not living for yourself, you're living for someone else, you're living in a different way to everyone else lives. That's a challenge to us. And it's also something that, especially in the society that we live in today, it's difficult, because we do live in a quite self-obsessed world. We live in, you could say, a narcissistic society where it's itself, it's all about you, and we're surrounded by messages every day about you, your plans, your goals, making the most of out of your life and that sort of thing. And we're surrounded by that. That word narcissistic or narcissism is an interesting one. It comes from the Greek myth of Narcissus, who was so beautiful. He fell in love with his own image of himself, and he was so infatuated with it he would just sort of stare endlessly at himself in a pool of water. Now, we may not regard ourselves as great beauties that we just need to stare at ourselves, but it is a check for us. Are we looking at ourselves? And it can be even the reverse of beauty. We could be so focused on our shortcomings or our weaknesses, and we could obsess about them. Well, there's maybe an antidote to that, and a contrast to that Greek myth story. The great Scottish preacher Robert Murray McCheyne said, "For every look at yourself, take 10 looks at Christ." And that is a wonderful encouragement to us. Yes, okay, it's important to not be ignorant of ourselves and what we're doing in life and that sort of thing, but actually Christ calls us to make our lives about him, to obsess about him, to make much of him. That's the Christian posture. Our life is not about us, it's about him. And that's what Paul describes here. The life I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. And that second part of that statement is also wonderfully important. That when we're talking about making much of Christ, when we're saying that my life is not about me, it's not about being individualistic and selfish and self-centered. When it's about Jesus, it's not about we're just going to work hard for Jesus. Actually, the number one thing of making much of Jesus in our lives is to enjoy his grace, to enjoy his love, to have our lives be shaped by knowing him and knowing his grace and knowing his mercy and knowing his forgiveness and knowing his Spirit. Friends, I'm sure you've got a busy day ahead of you today. Maybe there's lots going on. Maybe you're worried in lots of different ways or motivated, that sort of thing. Let's not ever move on from our number one priority in life. It's actually about enjoying Jesus, making much of him in our hearts as much as with our lives and the decisions that we make. So it's an invitation to come enjoy Jesus afresh. Look at him, look at what he's done for you, look at his great love for you. What a wonderfully personal reminder of the cross there. The Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. That's quite a rare thing for the Apostle Paul to actually talk in very, very personal terms. He's often talking about us and the church and that sort of thing, but this is one of the times that he's saying, no, he loves me. Why don't you say that to yourself this morning? Even recite that line. I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Thank you, Jesus. He's done that for you. Enjoy that wonderful truth today and let it shape our lives, and we can make much of him today.